So, trying to explain the unified field theory. We have a point here at 0, and the 0 here is at the fourth dimensional 0. So we have the fourth dimension, the third dimension, the second dimension, the first, and the 0. And then we have a negative series of dimensions if we're going to extrapolate through time in a crazy manner, which I'll get into later. So starting from the 0, we have an x and a y and a z coming out of here as extrapolated through these underdimensions, and this forms a logic point. The logic point is based on a logic gate in trying to commute it to a computer language, which will be the really only way to communicate or calculate this beyond what I have kind of drawn here as a single frame reference of space in a stopped state of time. So no time references on this chart. This is just position and coordination of what is going to be calculated. This is the unification of mathematics and then the unification of physics through the unification of mathematics, being able to write math all in one position. So starting from 0 at the fourth dimension, we have a 1, and then the 1 will cross through the square root of 1 and go into our first one. The 1 here is a line, and this line comes out of the logic point, or is included of the logic points that will draw the line between the two. And the line is always based upon the percentage of mass to vacuum in a ratio. So based upon what the origin statement and the conditions of the position, we have the position, and then we can have a continuum body being built up through from the center of gravity, so that the center of gravity is always at central, and then a point outside of central will then have a lesser continuum based upon its center of position. These are the conditions or constants that would be included into what's going on with the position and the body that we are in calculating. So starting off from 0, we have the center of gravity, not gravity itself, not the idea of building of gravity, but just gravity at that base. So it's the logic point that will make up gravity coming down to here when we have the separation and vacuum occurrences between the actual bodies that would always equal the square root of 1. So for the point of 1 then being a sublime point, which has a surface area but has no volume. This volume is imaginary. It's visible when you're in the underdimensions, but when you're above the continuum and in reference to it, there is no relativity to volume. It just has a surface area. It's a reflection of what's going on outside of it. So all the other points of 1 that have connected to each other and have a gravitational line between the two of them. So the square root of 1 is where gravity is, and between 2 points of 1, it would always be just the square root of 1 in the mathematical theorem. So you have a sublime point, and that's a ball, like a surface area without volume. And then you have the unatomic, which is the stacking of these sublime points. And the sublime points in a stack will give you all of geometry. You can plot any polygon, any condition of a geometric shape in 3 dimensions, or in condition on 2 dimensions, but the surface area would already cover that. And in another reference of the surface area, it would be in reference to this in a 2D plane, and it could also technically be the crosscut of this again if you're going to look at it through the underdimensions. Each dimension will coordinate to a point in the subdimension, so when you climb up the scale, you will actually climb down as the core is referencing into these continuums underneath the 0. So the 0 will actually, as you go up, it will imply down into a sort of base memory, if you would consider it that, but it just allows for what's going on outside to be in coordination of what's going on inside. And then these going into the conditions of what it is doing on the outside for that to be a memory of pattern, of frequency, of momentum and motion and inertia. So the constants build out of here, allowing for your top down for your bodies of your continuum bodies of domain. So your domain continuum bodies coming through in reference, so that you go from the line to the first one, which is the sublime point, to the unatomic stack, to the minute atomic, and the minute atomic is where your spin rate will begin. So when you have a spin rate, it is the amplification of the fourth dimension having all four dimensions in the fourth dimension, and so now you have a spin forming, which allows for a new reference to time. So it's a timestamp of rotation of cyclical statement that allows for the cyclical to occur. The gravitational reference of a sublime point has a minute atomic reference statement. So any 2 points of sublime reference inside of this level of domain will have interest in each other unless they are on the outsides of each other so that the center point reaches 0. If it's the center being the 1, any point out here that is 1 will that technically connect through gravity until it gets past that 1 point. And this is a scaling. So this is much larger than this point here, so that it takes on basis to the reference of mass to vacuum again, to do the influence of what the percentage is on the infinity from growing from line to circle to sphere to then a rotational sphere. The unatomic stack, there is a ratio of unatomic stacks around the core unatomic stack to make the minute atomic, in which case on the hypoatomic there is a series or an infinite number of fractional infinite numbers, so a percentage infinite number of minute atomic bodies going around a single minute atomic body to make up a hypoatomic. Then the same goes for the subatomic and the atomic and the molecules and the planets and the stars. It's just a growth schedule, and then it's a property change. So each one this one has a spin rate. This one allows for quark formation into layer, and so it has a negative spin or a quarter spin. Your subatomic allows for a subatomic body, and then allows for the atomics where you have a connective orbital, and then you have a separative orbital, and you have obviously all chemistry, all the asteroids, us, anything in life this is the kind of a really odd man out because it's not as patterned as the rest of it. So it's actually the middle point, which is somewhat strangely convenient that it's at 8. Even though it says 7 here, it's actually at the 8th position because of the square root of 1 being in position. So in this, you have then your position, your atomic body. The overall domain then allows for the bodies within. So if you are trying to calculate a minute atomic body, the molecular domain is its maximum, so that when you're calculating it, the overall space that you need to calculate is up to that of a molecular bond. So a covalent ionic bond will be the domain of the minute atomic of gravitational of influence. So anything within that will depict upon the minute atomic. At that point, when you are a chemical, like a molecule, and growing into something, you have a core inference that is going through the singularity. So because your mass is increasing to 100% at the 0, when you are building out, so that the center of gravity takes the majority of the mass and builds downwards to influence as you build up. As you build up, your influence of gravity has increased, and therefore the center is now going further past the singularity and to the 50-50 point, where you would have your event horizon down here at the surface area. You would then have your core surface area up here at the totality, where the central example is going on. And totalities only occur when it's reached its mass singularity point. So where you can't stuff anything more into it until it goes up a domain and starts having new properties because it has more energy and more mass. So over here you have mass time, when over here there was space time. And so you have space-time over with our normals, but you have mass time over here with our injection, where you have mass as the space and the space as the particle. So where the vacuum is the particle and then has the properties to coordinate to become the conditions, and has the statements of properties of growth that would be the same in this, only going in the opposite direction. And so now you have it backwards in time, but it shares the same moment of continuum. To jump away from a different moment, you would have to go above the 5th dimension and have multiple positions of moments where negative zeros and positive zeros are then going into a new condition off a new moment, so it would be plus and minus off of zero. And it's a space above the hyperverse, which in that condition is basically our space-time pocket. So like if you were here and you had a negative hyperverse, you could have negative universes and negative black holes and negative everything else, in the format being negative, that it would be formed of vacuum and being in mass, so that mass is then space, and it would operate the exact same way. It's just a flipped measure, and your perception would be the future would be our past and the past would be our future. But again, the moment of change is exactly the same so long as you're still in the fourth dimension, in which we are. Even in the hyperverse, the space-time pocket is still in the fourth dimension until you get to the megaverse and above. So in this, there is all the mathematics, and the mathematics is that this is the cube square law coming up here. You have Euler's constant being the fall rate in. You can have your Euler squared being now a condition of coming in other directions and other inferences and incidences, and what allows for the constants of change when you cube or start playing with your Euler to end up into your Fenenbaums. Having the position out of space-time, so where your origin is, you can build into van der Waals constant layers and allowing them to continue up to the point that you have your Riemann formulation, so that you can have this going upwards to the point where you can then calculate. Because when you have a black hole, the black hole's reference of gravitation is still in contact with your hypoatomic and your subatomic particles. Like if you have a ship that is made of, say, 700,000 metric tons, like a spaceship, the black hole is in connection to it hundreds of, or like billions of light years away. So the gravitational strength, because the black hole is so big, the gravitational strength to your ship is still huge. So if you want to go faster than the speed of light, you have to calculate what the black hole is doing, and the black hole is in reference to its field of influence being far greater, and so objects up here are actually in condition to the black hole, just like the black hole is onto the ship, and then the ship is up to its own atomic particles. So if you don't want all this stuff to go flying apart when you try and reach the speed of light, you got to calculate every black hole in your reference, which means taking in the entire map and doing it over frame rates. Frame rates being the map repeated over and over and over again for each continuum body within the entire system, as well as the entire system itself coming back up on and into that point, and then going down into your subdimensions, and then having your internal core being in reference through the singularity to where it is in negative space, so that your core above 50% mass is now in calculation. So each level that goes up, the strength of this also increases, so it goes up by half. Whereas your reference of outside domain, so if you're a hypoatomic particle, your reference state is all the way up to a black hole. So a black hole would have a hypoatomic core, whereas the hypoatomic space domain is that of the entire black hole's domain. So like where the black hole would register out to be a continuum body. And a black hole's continuum body technically includes the accretion disk. It's just an external extenuation of its internal form. It's a repetition. It's like a reciprocal and representation. So in time, the minute atomic is the new spin rate, and so it clocks with every single fourth on a time triumph to allow for its redistribution of time. You have your neg entropy coming off the back end, where you'd have entropy on the front end. Any position in this chart allows for your positions of your hypoatomics, so your Navier-Stokes equations would come first from subatomic turbulence, so that knowing what's going on inside the atomic body with the subatomic particles, and knowing what that turbulence is within your your Higgs bosons and your the photo field, and whatever else it's flowing through, because now the one is no longer one here where Einstein puts it, the one is way down here, which is why I put Schrodinger's equation and the Dirac equation into this representative field, because they didn't include the thermodynamics of everything going on in the van der Waals constants of the overall space-time. Like so what's going on in the universal constant of the universal background of every other object in continuum being in collaboration with the mathematics, because doing that mathematics would take billions of years, unless of course you build a computer. And I would like to show you the computer, but it's an image reference There it is. So to build that computer representation allows for a three-dimensional representation of time, or the coordination into quadrants. And so allowing it to calculate this way from your square representation, so coming down from that surface area, or in a reference to just straight up mathematical planes, coming down through, and then recoordinating it from the cubical to the quadratic. And it just makes it easier for the computer to calculate, while we would represent it this way to actually stitch in, so that it makes it easier for us to translate and understand what we're trying to do, where then the computer has the easier method for it to actually calculate it. And you would have to have a repeated format of these computers to make it bigger and bigger as you go up in the continuum statement. That's the grand unified field theory, is the having the computer. This is the unified field theory, which is just the field in unity. So in mathematics, again, so there's the Euler numbers, the Fennebaum, the van der Waardens. In mathematics, there's the cube square law, and there is every other basic mathematical equation you would want to put on, like motion, force, if you want to put on your theory of relativity, if you want to go into where thermodynamics layers actually exist for its formulation. And so therefore we would have anti-thermodynamics on the other scale, being that of anti-time. Hilbert's Hotel, again, going into the 100% along the totality lines. It just allows for every single mathematical condition to be drawn into one position so that it can be all used in one fluid form. And in that, it allows for it to be the unified field theory, because it allows for every single theory to be placed in one presentation and allow them all to interact with each other on their conditional environmental statements. So it's just a building scale. It is allowing for a continuum based upon properties. So again, property of our environment, the conditions of what we are, and then where and what we are in truth per frame rate, so per moment. And the calculation, it's very, very involving. I mean, you have to go through steps and steps and steps and steps and steps to generate what is appropriate. And then once again, this is going into the time scales and up into higher dimensions. So it's the very, very simplicity of this being redrawn into a much larger scale. And in origin, it used to look like that, but that was my first formulation, my first field. And it was, it was there. It helped me do what I needed to do, but more investigation helps it become better. So I hope you somewhat understand what's going on. So 0 crossing through to 1. 1, we get 1 as a surface area without a volume. We get into a stack. We get into a stack of stacks. We get into the stack of stacks. We get into the subatomic particle. The quark would be like the conditions of what's going on from here, and then again the conditions from here and here as how those energies will relate back and forth. So you would have your like core quark and then your spin rate quarks to allow for them to build through. And that's what the layers are doing from positive to negative, going up and down. So again, the Schrodinger's equation just didn't include what's going on in the overall continuum. So it's reduced from where the mathematical constants actually are in the equation, as opposed to where they can be once the Riemann theory has been fully established. And that is building that computer, allowing for it to be calculated up. The computer's huge. It will take, basically, it's the continuum of the network being allowed to do it, so that supercomputers connect with each other to allow for the environment to be built, and it makes for a much better gaming system, as well as a physics engine. So it has multiple purposes, and it'll allow for better fundamental design, better aerodynamics, better aeronautics. Like we'll be able to actually calculate turbulence. And so it's the unification of mathematics to be able to present into a single position and allow for it to be upcalculated. And this is the start point. The end point is having the computer capable of actually calculating it. And that has to be designed to be a specific computer for a specific task, like any computational machine that we've ever designed before, whether it's a Pascal or a first ENIAC. It's just one level that has to be progressed to the next, so that it's a 2D chip, but it's stated into a 3D plane and calculating its core representations through itself. So hopefully somebody out there understands what I'm talking about. So building up in scale so that a planet is actually not a round or a square, or is it flat? It's a body of molecules, and each molecule is a body of atoms, and each atom is a body of subatomic particles, and so on and so forth, all the way down to zero. But even that zero is made up of things that go all the way down to where time actually truly stops. So time doesn't stop with going light speed. Time stops when you have mass and vacuum at either 50%, 100%, and zero and 100%, or the negative 50/50s, which is just the opposite side of your. So basically, where the singularity would exist for the black hole, or the singularity would exist for a negative component of inside of an object, to where the half point is. If you're on the other side of the half point, the black hole in this line then becomes where this black hole, which I would call a white hill, in the opposite side in mass time, the white hill would then have its opposites going off in the opposite direction. So if you are in mass time and made of vacuum, your core is that of an actual normal singularity. So basically, if you were inside of a black hole in mass time, it would seem more like normal space than their space. But there isn't enough room because, again, you've only got room for a hypoatomic particle inside of a black hole for one existence. There's tons of minute atomic particles inside that hypoatomic particle that has stated up the scales of growth. And so in condition of how small a subatomic particle is, you're going down magnitudes to be able to drop down to find the true center of gravity in its origin calculation of it being zero and no longer relative to anything but gravitation itself. And that's the better start point for calculating physics, because it doesn't put a imaginary limiter. Like it's saying that if you have a 38 Packard that has this much horsepower or a horsepower, you can't have any energy less than a horsepower. Like, sorry, you can't lift that. Like if it weighs less than a horsepower, you can lift it for free. Like that's why time doesn't stop, because you're going less than one. Like time stops down here. And all this stuff is smaller than light, goes faster than light in respect to relativity. But that theory of relativity line drops off and starts here, when actually we need a line coming out here to formulate gravitational relativity. And with that, black holes will make far more sense. You'll have quantum entanglement being relative into the interaction of these layers. The black hole theory will become far more renowned as to what's going on inside of the black hole, what's going on to the reference of the black hole into its singularity state, inside of where its temporal equilibrium is being calculated, is being formulated, so that its 50/50 points are relative and understood. The surface area of each atom then being understood, the surface area of each body underneath the atom being understood through the event horizons, which it can present, again, through that delineation of its Euler wraparound of the origin zero. And that's just the reference, again, to its percentage in mass over vacuum. And so, like, again, like this entire body right here in that statement is that statement right here. It's just these lines being calculated out as either a cross-section or a surface area displacement statement. And it's generally simple, it's straightforward, but it's just math and wrapped around math again, so that everything has a nice conditional position, sits where it needs to be, has its statements for its presentation of where things would be, to allow for the formulation of the mathematics that we need to write out, that nobody can write out on paper, because it's a billion lines long. You would need a computer to, and a friendly method of input to say, I want point here, I want point here, I want point here. I can calculate where my points are and then tell me what's going to happen once I've calculated those points, as opposed to us trying to do it line per line per line per line per line per frame per frame per frame per frame per frame per body per body per body per body per body, and the total continuum over, once again, the timestamps and all the other conditions and orientations that are going to change per event, per moment of every single thing that's going on in occurrence, to allow for the overall body to be drawn into one single form. Unified field theory, very, very, very involved. Mathematics, quite fun. I don't know if anybody else gets it. Somebody else might get it. That's why I'm sharing. Let me know.